picture yourself stumbling through a midnight market in Thebes, where the incense is thick, drums echo like a heartbeat, and suddenly the music screeches to a halt, like someone pulled the plug on a party you didn't even know you were invited to. Hey folks, before we unspool this mystery, smash that like button if you love a good ancient cliffhanger, and drop a comment with your favorite cursed mummy meme. Now dim the lights, snag a comfy pillow, maybe even a cup of tea that smells like sand and citrus, because we're about to walk into the quiet after the feast. You feel the cool stone under your sandals, hear the distant hiss of the Nile's night wind, and wonder why the once loud festivals faded like fresco paint in a desert storm. Turns out, the gods weren't angry. It was paperwork, taxes, political shuffles, and a plague that reeked of rotten figs, forcing the priests to swap drumsticks for scrolls. And frankly, that's as anticlimactic as my Wi-Fi dropping during a TikTok binge. So, what do you think killed the celebrations? Politics, disease, or plain old party fatigue? Let me know below. And stay tuned as we peel back centuries of sand to find the truth. In the mist-shrouded valley of Karak, the early dawn slipped over the stone cottages like a thin sigh. Lyra, a young healer with hands still stained from herb poultices, followed a narrow herd trail to the ridge where the mountain clans gathered. There she watched elders grind the bleached marrow of long dead beasts into a fine, whisper-soft powder within stone mortars. The powder, mixed with crushed sage and river mint, formed a paste that each clan member spread on their teeth before the sun rose fully. The ritual was spoken of as a guard against the spirit decay that seemed to linger in the valley's cold shadows, a belief that settled over the people like the morning fog. Lyra felt the grit of bone against her palm and sensed a subtle resistance in the air, as if the valley itself measured each motion. When she asked an elder why the practice persisted, his voice cracked like dry bark, explaining that the paste left a metallic sting that reminded them of mortality. The grinding stones clanged louder that day, echoing off the cliffs, and a few youths winced as the paste scraped across raw gums. Whispered doubts drifted among the women, who wondered whether the bitter taste was worth the promised protection. Yet the clan matriarch, her hair bound in a leather cord, pressed the paste onto Lyra's teeth without hesitation, marking the moment with a solemn nod. As the paste settled, a thin white film glimmered like frost, and the participants laughed softly at the absurdity of fighting unseen spirits with bone dust. The irony lay in the fact that the very marrow they cherished to shield their souls also wore down enamel, a quiet erosion no one voiced aloud. Children swapped stories of ghostly teeth that fell out, while elders swapped the same paste for a second round, as if the ritual could outpace its own consequences. Lyra observed the faint smile on the matriarch's face, a smile that seemed to acknowledge the paradox without breaking the ceremony's rhythm. In the background, the river sang a steady murmur, indifferent to the human attempt to tame decay with the remnants of the dead. By midday, the grinding stones grew still, and a gentle hush settled over the valley as the sun brushed the rooftops with amber light. Families returned to their hearths, the paste lingering on their tongues like a muted promise, while the scent of mint lingered in the cool air. Lyra repaired a torn satchel, the needle's click punctuating the soft rustle of woven blankets in the doorway. The clan members exchanged quiet glances, their eyes reflecting a shared acceptance of the ritual's place in their everyday rhythm. Even the wind seemed to slow, slipping through the cracks of stone walls, carrying a faint, comforting rasp of bone dust settling on the ground. As evening deepened, Lyra sat on the stone ledge, watching the valley darken, while the paste on her teeth softened into a pale glaze. She thought of the countless generations that had brushed away both breath and fear with the same crushed remnants, a steady thread tying fleeting lives together. The quiet crackle of fireflies outside reminded her that decay was not an enemy, but a natural cadence, gently erased by time. In that moment, the bone-minted dawn felt less like a battle, and more like a humble acknowledgement of humanity's willingness to shape even the smallest ritual. The valley exhaled a slow sigh, and Lyra, with a calm smile, let the night's coolness wash over her, accepting the subtle, perpetual exchange between bone and breath. Lyra walked the worn stone path toward the sacred quarry as the late afternoon sun sifted through thin clouds, casting a pale amber over the cracked earth. The quarry lay open like a shallow basin, its walls echoing faint drips of water that had long forgotten the sounds of chisels. Workers in coarse woolen tunics moved in measured steps, their hands dusted with pale femur shards that glimmered like broken moonlight. Lyra could feel the cool grit under her boots, a reminder of generations who had turned bone into a communal paste for cleaning teeth. The air held a faint scent of limestone mixed with the chalky tang of pulverized marrow, a mundane perfume that steadied her breath. She paused at the edge, listening to the low hum of labor, and sensed the quiet anticipation that marked the start of the harvest. A group from the neighboring Kesh tribe arrived with silent carts, their banners half tucked against the wind, and claimed a stretch of the quarry that had been left empty for months. Their leader, a broad-shouldered woman with a mask of shadows over her face, offered a trade of woven baskets for a portion of the coveted bone dust. But the tone of her voice carried a thin line of insistence. Lyra felt the tension rise like the low creak of a wooden beam under weight, as the two clans circled the same patch of bone-laden ground. Negotiations unfolded in short, measured phrases, each word landing like a stone on the quiet water of the quarry floor. The murmuring of the workers slowed, and the clink of tools softened as both sides weighed the value of the pale powder against the need for peace. In the end, an uneasy agreement was inked on a strip of bark, its edges frayed by the dust that fluttered around it. Just as the agreement was sealed, a distant rumble rolled through the stone walls, startling a flock of sparrows into a nervous flutter. The tremor grew into a sudden rockslide, sending a cascade of ancient limestone and splintered femur shards down the narrow gorge, their impact echoing like a muted drum roll. The dust cloud rose thick enough to veil the sun, and for a moment the quarry seemed to hold its breath, the sound of falling stone muffled by the sudden hush. Lyra's hand brushed the cold rock, feeling the gritty residue cling to her skin, while the rival tribes' carts halted, their wheels squeaking against the sudden drop of ground. The irony lay in the quiet that followed the violence, as workers from both sides stepped back to watch the shifting landscape, their faces soft with a sleepy resignation. The slide sealed the entrance to a lower chamber, leaving a silent, newly formed wall that seemed to whisper of forgotten passages. When the dust settled, a gentle amber light filtered through the remaining cracks, painting the quarry floor with a warm, subdued glow. The two clans found themselves sharing the same shade of relief, the sound of their breathing matching the slow rhythm of the wind through the hollowed stone. Lyra helped clear the displaced shards, each movement deliberate, the tactile feel of bone powder slipping between her fingers, reminding her of the everyday purpose behind the ritual. The rival tribe's leader lowered her mask, revealing eyes softened by the shared labor, and offered a modest cup of warm broth as a gesture of goodwill. Around a low stone table, they passed the broth, the steam rising in lazy curls that curled around their tired shoulders, and spoke in low tones about the day's work. The quiet camaraderie settled like a soft blanket over the quarry, sealing the moment with a sense of calm that lingered longer than the echo of the slide. As twilight deepened, Lyra lingered at the edge of the quarry, listening to the faint pop of cooling stone and the distant murmur of water finding new paths. She reflected on how the crushed bones, once a simple tool for cleaning teeth, had become a bargaining chip, a source of conflict, and finally a bridge between wary peoples. The quarry, now half filled with settled dust, seemed to hold the memory of each footstep, each whispered negotiation, and each unspoken understanding. Lyra's thoughts drifted to the generations before her, whose hands had shaped the same marrow into paste, their lives marked by the same quiet perseverance. In the cool night air, the quarry's stone walls glowed faintly, as if recalling the subtle irony that ordinary labor can both divide and unite. With a soft sigh, she turned away, the steady cadence of her steps echoing the slow, steady beat of history itself. In the low light of dawn, Lyra brushed the coarse paste of pulverized elk bone against her teeth. The gritty flavor, a familiar ritual that marked each day in her remote mountain village. The paste, once bright with the scent of fresh marrow, now lay dull, its bitterness hinting at the thinning herds that roamed the valley below. Children watched her steady motions, the slow sweep of her hand echoing the rhythm of weathered stone walls and the soft clatter of wooden mortars. Even the elder women, who had measured seasons by the antlers that fell each autumn, spoke in hushed tones about the loss of vigor in the bone dust. Lyra felt the weight of collective memory settle on her shoulders, as if each grain of paste carried a fragment of the past she was tasked to preserve. When the village healer announced that the paste would no longer cleanse without the rare crystal mint that grew beyond the ridge, a quiet tension rippled through the thin air of the communal hut. The forest beyond the settlement had been sealed for generations, its canopy a dark veil that locals only whispered about at night. Lyra packed a small bundle of woven rags, a chipped stone bowl, and a rusted knife, feeling the coarse fabric brush against her skin like a reminder of the work ahead. The path to the forbidden woods was marked by moss-covered stones that slipped underfoot, each step stirring a faint scent of pine and damp earth. As she crossed the threshold, the distant call of a lone raven seemed to count the seconds she left the safety of the flame-lit doorway. Deep within the thicket, a figure cloaked in shifting shadows emerged, its outline vague, as if formed from mist and leaf woven light. A guardian spirit, whose face remained forever blurred by the dappling sun. It offered Lyra a mirror of water that reflected not her image, but a succession of decaying elk antlers, each one crumbling into dust as the seasons passed. The irony lay in the spirit's silent lesson. The very paste she cherished was rooted in impermanence, and seeking a permanent cure only highlighted the fleeting nature of the source. Lyra watched the antlers dissolve, her breath steadied by the cool taste of pine on her tongue, and she realized that the quest for restoration was itself a form of surrender. With a soft nod, she placed her hand on the spirit's arm, feeling the faint tremor of ancient bark beneath the phantom flesh. The guardian stepped aside, revealing a small clearing where a slender sprig of crystal mint glowed faintly, its leaves catching the waning light like brushed silver on a cream-colored cloth. Lyra bent slowly, the tips of her fingers brushing the cool, slightly oily surface, and she gathered the herb with reverent care, the scent of mint mingling with the lingering earthiness of the forest floor. The spirit's voice, a rustle of leaves, whispered a simple instruction. Crush the mint together with the bone dust, allowing the two textures to merge in a gentle, steady rhythm. She returned to the village, with the wind softly rattling the shutters, the night settling into a deep amber hush as she prepared the new paste by the hearth. The quiet clink of the stone bowl and the soft stir of the mortar created a lullaby of restoration, a calm that settled over the gathered families like a warm blanket. When Lyra finally shared the renewed paste, its flavor bore a subtle clarity, a faint coolness that lifted the bitterness once associated with scarcity. And the villagers smiled with a quiet gratitude that needed no words. They brushed the mint infused paste across their teeth, feeling the smoothness of the mixture against enamel, and the room filled with the soft sound of collective sighs, as if each exhale released a held breath of expectation. In the following weeks, the elk herds returned in modest numbers, their hooves echoing faintly across the meadow, reminding the people of the cyclical balance they now understood better. Lyra stood at the edge of the firelight, watching the smoke rise, contemplating how the pursuit of a single herb had revealed a broader patience within the community. The story settled into the village's memory like a gentle tide, a reminder that even the most stubborn traditions bend softly under the weight of time. In the low light of early dawn, the valley of Crave gathered for the rite of brightening, a quiet ceremony that marked the yearly cleaning of teeth with the fine powder of crushed marrow bones. Women in earth-dyed skirts ground the dried ribs on stone slabs, while the elder, his face hidden in the soft glare of sunrise, handed the resulting dust to each participant. Lyra, a weaver known for threading silver threads into wool, stood near the central altar, the platform hewn from river stone and smoothed by countless brushes of breath. The air carried the faint scent of pine resin and the metallic tang of calcium, mingling with the low murmur of villagers arranging wooden cups. As each person swirled the powder with water, a faint, chalky foam formed on their tongues, and the community watched the collective gleam of newly brightened smiles. The ritual felt as steady as the river that cut through the valley, a simple rhythm that had endured long before any written record. Late in the afternoon, a low horn cracked across the ridge, announcing the arrival of the rival Dren tribe, whose banners fluttered like restless sparrows. Their war drums beat against the stillness, each thud echoing off the cliff faces and stirring a thin cloud of dust that rose from the dried riverbed. Without warning, they surged toward the altar, their spears striking the stone platform and sending shards of carved bone scattering into the valley floor. The ceremonial altar shattered, scattering the sacred bone powder like a sudden snowfall of gray ash across the faces of the gathered people. Lyra felt the cold rush of wind through the open space, the metallic scent of broken bone mixing with the iron of blood that seeped from a wounded guard. The crowd stood still, eyes wide but bodies rooted, as the invaders' shouts blended with the ragged breath of the valley. In the chaos, Lyra remembered the small vial of crystal mint, paste she had crafted weeks before, its surface gleaming faintly in the fading light. She pressed the paste into her palm, letting droplets fall onto the swirling bone dust, and watched as the mixture fizzed into a silvery mist. The mist rose, catching the sun's last rays and flaring into a bright, blinding shield that reflected the attackers' own torches back toward them. The invaders paused, shielding their eyes from the unexpected glare, their aggressive rhythm broken by a moment of bewildered silence. The absurdity of a simple cleaning, paste becoming a defensive wall, lingered in the air. As gentle chuckles rose from the villagers, who saw the irony of their daily habit turned into salvation. When the light dimmed, the shield faded like a breath, leaving a calm hush over the valley that settled the dust back onto the worn stones. The Dren retreating footsteps softened, their banners lowering as they slipped away down the slope, leaving only the faint scrape of boots on gravel. Lyra and the elders gathered the scattered powder, scooping it into woven baskets with deliberate, careful motions. The sound of fibers brushing against bone, a soft percussion. Children returned to their games, teeth still tingling from the mint, while the women washed the altar stones in cool river water, steam rising in lazy curls. The sky turned a soft amber, and a gentle wind brushed the valley, carrying the faint scent of burnt pine and the lingering coolness of crystal mint. In the quiet that followed, each heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the slow pulse of the river, a reminder that even conflict could dissolve into ordinary rhythm. As night fell, Lyra sat on the stone edge, the moonlight catching the faint glint of bone fragments embedded in her palm. She thought of the centuries of people who had brushed their teeth with crushed bones, each generation adding its own small imperfection to the ritual. The dust now settled. It left a pale film on the teeth of the valley's children, a reminder that even the cleanest smile bears the mark of its making. Lyra smiled faintly, aware that the very thing meant to polish had once again become the shield, and that humanity's simple habits often hide unexpected strength. With a quiet sigh, she watched the fireflies flicker, their soft glow echoing the lingering sparkle of the crystal mint mist, and felt a gentle gratitude for the steady, imperfect continuity of life. When the last echo of the war faded, Lyra stood on the stone terrace of the valley and opened a battered vellum, the ink still damp from the night before. She traced the outline of the bone mint brush, the fine powder of crushed marrow that had once smelled of earth and fire, and wrote each measured motion in a steady hand. The morning light fell on her parchment, turning the words a pale amber, while the wind lifted the scent of herbs from the fields below. Children gathered at the foot of the terrace, their eyes wide but calm. As she described the way, the paste was mixed with river water and rubbed on teeth with a wooden stick. In that quiet moment, the valley felt the first breath of a new ritual, simple and unhurried, ready to be carried beyond its borders. Soon the neighboring hamlets sent envoys, their boots clacking on the dusty road, curious, yet wary of this strange practice born of desperation. Lyra welcomed them into the communal hearth, the fire crackling as she demonstrated the slow, circular motion of the brush against enamel, the faint crunch of bone under the tip audible like distant rain. The villagers watched the pale foam slide across their hands, feeling the cool pulse of the water and the gritty texture against their gums, while murmurs rose about the old stories of hidden faces in the moonlight. Some skeptics frowned, their shoulders tightening, yet the taste of mint and mineral lingered, a subtle reminder that survival could be gentle. The exchange ended with a shared loaf, the crust warm, and a silent agreement that the method would travel with them, carried on the back of a humble carrier. As the practice spread, the once silent valleys began to wear a curious glow. The white of the teeth seemed to echo the pale bones that had been ground in the early mornings. Travelers laughed softly, noting how a habit born of hardship now served as a badge of resilience, the very act of brushing becoming a quiet proclamation of endurance. Mothers instructed their children, their fingers brushing the soft cheekbones as they guided the wooden sticks, the sound of gentle scraping mixing with the rustle of wheat fields. The irony settled like dust on a shelf, a ritual of preservation, once desperate, now a modest pride, displayed in market squares, where elders displayed sparkling smiles alongside woven baskets. Yet no triumph was shouted. Instead, a mellow sigh drifted through the air, as if the valley itself smiled with a knowing, tired amusement. Years turned, and the valley's children grew under the mellow glow of sunrise, their mornings beginning with the soft scrape of bone mint, paste across teeth, the taste of cool mineral lingering like a secret. They ran through the narrow lanes, the stone walls warm under their palms, their laughter mixing with the distant clink of tools in the smithy. In the evenings, families gathered around low tables, the smell of stew mingling with the faint aftertaste of the nightly brushing. Each smile reflecting the faint light of oil lamps. The practice became as ordinary as the passing of seasons, a steady rhythm that anchored daily life without fanfare. Its presence felt more than spoken of. Even the oldest storytellers, their voices hushed, would pause to note the bright gleam of a child's grin, a silent nod to the past that had shaped the present. When the last of the original bone mint containers cracked and fell to dust, the valley remembered not the loss, but the quiet strength it had forged. Lyra, now with silver strands in her hair, would sit by the river bank, feeling the cold water flow over her hands as she recalled the first shaky strokes of the brush. The children, now adults, would watch their own offspring mimic the same deliberate motion. The sound of the wooden stick against enamel, a gentle reminder of perseverance. In the hush of twilight, the valley exhaled, its breath carrying the faint scent of mint and stone, a calm affirmation that humble survival had become a lasting heritage. The story settled like a soft blanket over the hills, inviting future generations to brush gently, smile knowingly, and let the quiet echo of past resilience linger in every breath. In the humid shade of a marble arcade, the clang of cartwheels and the murmur of market stalls formed a soft backdrop. As young Marcus stepped into the narrow doorway of Gaius's apothecary, the scent of roasted chestnuts mixed with the faint ash of hearths, and a slab of rough wooden counter greeted his bare feet. Gaius, a weathered man with a lined forehead, offered a measured nod, his hands already dusted with fine charcoal from a recent hearth sweep. Marcus felt the cool touch of the stone floor under his weight, aware that each step echoed a tradition older than the empire's marble arches. The apprentice sensed the rhythm of the shop, the slow pulse of preparation that would soon become his daily choreography. Soon a wealthy patron arrived, his toga immaculate, his expression a tapestry of impatience stitched with haughty expectation. He demanded a swift polishing of his teeth, fearing the faintest hint of soot might betray his status among the Senate. Gaius lifted a copper bowl, its rim rimed with a fine black powder that clinked against the wood as he poured, and Marcus felt a tremor of pressure as the client tapped his foot. The apprentice's fingers brushed the gritty charcoal, gritty as the road stones beyond the shop, and a subtle heat rose from the bowl, a reminder of the fire that birthed the powder. The tension hung like a thin veil, the quiet of the shop strained by the patron's sharp breath, and the expectation of immediate, flawless results. With a measured smile, Gaius spread the powdered charcoal over a small, smooth stone, whispering that the mixture of soot and bone would scrub away not just food remnants, but the vanity that clung to the elite's smiles. The patron watched, eyebrows raised, as the apprentice gently brushed the gritty paste onto a set of ivory dentition replicas. The sound of soft, rasping echoing faintly in the shop. There was an unspoken irony in the fact that the most polished mouths of Rome relied on the ash of everyday fires, a reminder that grandeur often rests upon the humble remnants of common life. Marcus sensed the amusement in Gaius's eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that the empire's glitter was dusted with the same soot that lit humble hearths. The scene settled into a subtle comedy, the patron's pretensions softened by the coarse texture of the mixture, leaving a faint, earthy scent that lingered longer than any perfumed cologne. The afternoon waned, and the shop settled into a steady cadence of grinding bone on a stone pestle. The sound a low, rhythmic grind like distant sea waves against a pier. Gaius guided Marcus's hand, the cool metal of the pestle sinking into the marrow of a small animal bone, releasing a faint, sweet scent that mixed with the lingering charcoal. Together they measured the powder, the grains slipping through their fingers like fine sand, and placed the blend into a shallow ceramic dish that warmed slightly under the waning sun. The quiet routine wrapped the apprentice in a calm that felt as ancient as the marble statues outside. Each motion a deliberate echo of generations who had tended to the same humble need. As the shop's door closed gently against the evening breeze, the two men shared a brief, exhausted smile, their faces softened by the soft amber light that filtered through the lattice shutters. When the street lamps flickered to life, Marcus lingered by the doorway, watching the shadows of the agora stretch across the cobblestones, his thoughts turning inward like the slow swirl of powder in a bowl. He reflected on the modest yet essential role of the apothecary, how the gritty mixture of charcoal and bone whispered of mortality, impermanence, and the quiet dignity of daily care. The city around him breathed a sigh of heat and dust. Yet, within the walls of the shop, there was a lingering sense of continuity that transcended the fleeting fashions of the Senate. Marcus understood that the softness of a smile could be forged from harsh elements, and that his own hands, now stained with ash, were part of an unhurried lineage of caretakers. With a gentle nod to Gaius, he stepped back into the evening, carrying the muted lesson that even the grandest of Rome's ambitions are, at root, brushed clean by humble, smoky dust. The marble steps of the forum hum with the soft clink of sandals as merchants set up stalls, and a whisper follows the wind. A charismatic Greek trader from Alexandria promises a herbal paste that could sweeten the bitter grind of charcoal and bone powder. Marcus, a seasoned dentifrice vendor, watches the sunrise paint the columns a warm amber, while his apprentice Gaius polishes a slate of powdered bone, feeling the cool granules sift through his fingers. The scent of burnt wood lingers, comforting and familiar, as customers line up to receive the familiar black paste that has kept their smiles modestly bright for decades. In the distance, the market stalls rustle, and a quiet curiosity nudges the crowd, though most remain loyal to the blackened tradition. The scene settles into a gentle rhythm, each breath echoing the slow pulse of Rome's daily commerce. A sudden crackle shatters the morning calm when a stray ember ignites a stack of twine near the fishmonger's stall, and the fire spreads with a hungry hiss, licking the arches of the nearby market. Charcoal carts, once stacked like dark ribs, crackle and crumble, sending ash into the air and dimming the familiar scent that had steadied the vendor's hands. Marcus feels the heat on his cheek, the heat that now threatens the very material of his craft, while Gaius watches the flames devour the supply of fresh charcoal, the smoke turning his eyes a smoky gray. The crowd's murmurs swell into a low lament, the market's heartbeat stuttering as the supply chain sputters. In that tense stillness, the promise of the Greeks' herbal paste flickers like a distant lantern, offering a possible rescue from scarcity. When the smoke clears, the Greek trader sets his wooden table beside the charred remnants, his smile a quiet curve as he unmasks a jar of emerald green paste, its fragrance a blend of mint and distant herbs. Marcus, wiping soot from his apron, raises an eyebrow, feeling the gritty texture of his remaining bone powder slip between his thumb and forefinger, a reminder of years of practiced habit. Gaius, curious despite the lingering ash, dips a wooden stick into the paste, noting how it slides smoother than the usual gritty slurry. The coolness against his tongue, a subtle surprise. Yet the market's patrons, accustomed to the familiar taste of soot, watch the exchange with a mix of skepticism and intrigue, their laughter a muted ripple in the evening air. The irony hangs like a soft banner. The fire that destroyed the old supply also ushered in a tentative invitation to change, though none can say which will linger longer on their tongues. As dusk settles, the market restores a quiet cadence. Merchants replace the burnt barrels with fresh bundles of ash, and the black paste is reconstituted using the soft ash mixed with the remaining bone powder, yielding a gentler texture that still bears the familiar scent of burnt wood. Marcus steadies his hand, feeling the cool ash against his palm, while Gaius carefully measures the new mixture, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The Greek trader, now a quiet observer, offers a small spoonful of his herbal paste to a passing child, who smiles and returns to his mother, the taste lingering like a faint breeze. The crowd settles into a shared rhythm, voices lowered, and the forum's marble walls absorb the soft echo of conversation about teeth, health, and the day's events. In this calm, the market embraces both the old and the new, each providing comfort in its own modest way. Night deepens, and the lanterns cast an amber glow over the worn stone, illuminating the quiet exchange of stories about how scarcity taught the Romans to adapt their dental rituals. Marcus, cleaning his tools, reflects on the ash's faint grit that now kisses his lips, a reminder that even loss can birth a subtle refinement. Gaius, later at home, brushes his own teeth with the blended paste, feeling the cool moisture against his gums, and he ponders the fleeting allure of novelty against the steadiness of tradition. The Greek trader packs his jar, his silhouette merging with the shadows, his face unseen, as he departs on the road that carries both promise and anonymity. Above them, the stars blink slowly, as if recording the small, enduring human effort to keep a smile steady amid the ever-turning tides of supply and desire. In the low, stone-lined cellar of the apothecary, Marcus carefully measured a handful of fine bone powder, its pale dust catching the faint glow of an oil lamp. He added a drizzle of honey, thick and amber, letting its scent mingle with the cool rustle of dry herbs. A sprig of mint, harvested at dawn, was crushed between his fingers, releasing a fleeting chill that brushed his palm. The mixture settled into a porous jar, the charcoal from the furnace giving it a muted gray hue. Outside, the city's nocturnal murmurs faded, leaving only the soft clink of glass and the distant wind through the forum. Marcus felt an odd resolve, as if preserving a fragment of the past required his own quiet endurance. When the first patrons arrived at the dimly lit counter, their brows furrowed beneath the heavy brows of their togas, and they inspected the new paste with a wary glance. The older customers, accustomed to the austere charcoal of tradition, whispered about betrayal beneath the vaulted arches. A thin hand lifted the lid, the aroma of honey and mint drifting like a gentle breeze over the stone. Their teeth, still stained from years of soot, hesitated before the unfamiliar sweetness brushed their tongues. A murmur rose, not of anger, but of unsettled doubt, as the clatter of clay cups punctuated the hush. Marcus sensed the weight of expectation, the silent challenge of deviating from an inherited ritual. Yet the irony lay not in the formula, but in the quiet comedy of the moment. A Roman, a civilization famed for its marble statues, now negotiating the taste of a paste that smelled of meadow and bee. The skeptics, while clutching their cups, inadvertently smiled at the contrast between hardened tradition and the soft, lingering mint that tinged the air. Their laughter, restrained, fluttered like a moth within the cramped cellar, and the stone walls seemed to absorb it without judgment. The paste, now tinged with a faint green, reflected the lamplight in a way the plain charcoal never had. Even the most rigid patron found himself taking a tentative bite, the honey coating his teeth with a warm gloss. The scene unfolded with a gentle absurdity that made the night feel less rigid, more human. As the hour waned and the oil lamp sputtered, the conversations settled into a calm rhythm, voices lowering to a soft murmur that blended with the distant hum of the city. The patrons, now comfortable with the altered taste, exchanged quiet anecdotes about childhood teeth and forgotten recipes, their hands resting lightly on the cool stone. Marcus, wiping a smear of paste from his forearms, listened more than he spoke, feeling the steady pulse of the cellar beneath his feet. The air grew cooler, the mint scent fading into the background like a faint memory. In that stillness, the blend of bone powder, honey, and mint seemed less a rebellion and more an evolution, a subtle shift that required no proclamation. The night closed around them like a soft blanket, each breath measured and unhurried. When the first pale light of morning seeped through the narrow windows, the cellar emptied, leaving Marcus alone among the jars that now held a quiet testament to compromise. He glanced at the remaining paste, its surface dull, yet tinged with the remnants of honey, and considered how the small act of flavoring had altered the perception of an ancient practice. The stone walls, indifferent, kept the echo of the night's conversations, reminding him that history advances through countless such modest adjustments. Marcus felt a gentle melancholy, aware that his contribution would blend into the larger tapestry of Roman daily life. Unnoticed yet persistent, he closed the shutters, the cool stone floor beneath his soles grounding him as he stepped into the waking streets. In the soft glow of day, the scent of mint lingered faintly, a reminder that even the most steadfast customs can be brushed by the tender hand of change. In the cool shade of the Forum, the town gathered for the annual Great Smile Contest, a quiet ceremony where citizens displayed the gleam of their teeth as if measuring the sunrise. Marcus, a modest potter, mixed soot from the ash furnace with finely ground bone powder, feeling the gritty texture slip through his fingers as a thin, dark paste. He scented the air with a faint iron hint, recalling the cold river water he used to rinse his tools each dawn. The judges, a trio of elderly matrons, sat on stone benches, their eyes steady, their hands lightly resting on cracked wooden tablets. As the first light caught the stone arches, the crowd settled into a soft rustle of anticipation, a collective breath held in patient stillness. A few steps away, a Greek trader named Nikos watched the preparation with a quiet, uneasy stare, his sandals scraping the dusty path. He slipped a small vial of bitter oil into the basket of charcoal, the liquid glinting like a thin veil of night when the sun struck it. The subtle clink of glass against stone went unnoticed as the crowd shifted, but the scent of the oil drifted, mingling with the earthy paste and adding a faint, acrid note. Marcus sensed the change, his palm tingling as he lifted the vessel. Yet he continued, his motions deliberate and unhurried. The judges lifted their tablets, the pages whispering as they turned, unaware of the tiny betrayal settled within the mixture. When Marcus finally applied the paste to his own teeth, the charcoal smeared across his gums like a soft charcoal sketch, the bone particles creating a gentle, cool scrape against enamel. As he smiled, a sudden flash of whiteness emerged, brighter than any marble column in the forum, catching the judge's eyes like a sunrise reflected on a still pond. Yet a faint, oily sheen lingered at the edges of his grin, a reminder of the hidden oil that had been introduced. The jurors exchanged glances, the quiet murmur of their conversation sounding like distant waves against the marble steps. In that moment, the contest held both the triumph of a shining smile and the quiet embarrassment of an unintended flaw, a subtle irony that drew a muted, almost amused smile from the onlookers. As the crowd dispersed, the sun slipped lower, casting a warm amber glow over the stone pavement, and the lingering scent of charcoal faded into the evening air. Marcus washed his hands in a shallow basin, feeling the cool water glide over his skin and the roughness of the bone powder washed away, leaving his fingertips smooth. He watched the Greek trader pack his wares, the trader's shoulders relaxing as if a weight had been lifted, and the murmurs of the market resumed their gentle rhythm. The judges returned to their tablets, their pens moving slowly, the sound of ink soaking into parchment, a quiet metronome for the dusk. In the soft hush that settled, the town seemed to inhale the night, accepting both the brilliance of the smile and the modest mishap with calm resignation. Later, under the lanterns that flickered like distant stars, Marcus reflected on the day's events, feeling the slight ache in his jaw from the gritty paste and the faint pride of his brightened grin. He understood that the pursuit of perfection was always tinged with imperfection, much like the charcoal that left a faint mark on his lip. The townsfolk, sipping modest wine, shared quiet jokes about the oily sheen, their laughter low and unhurried, a reminder that human folly often becomes a gentle story passed down. The great smile contest, now recorded in the worn tablets of the Forum, would stand as a modest testament to the enduring desire for visible health and the quiet humor found in every subtle slip. In the steady pulse of the night, history held the scene like a sleeping breath, a calm reminder that even the smallest act of care can echo through ages with a soft, reflective smile. The early sun brushed the Forum's marble with a soft amber, and the hum of merchants' stalls blended with the clink of bronze bowls. In a modest shop near the basilica, an apprentice named Marcus watched his master grind charcoal into a fine, soot-dark powder. The scent of ash mingled with the salty breath of passers-by, each of whom paused to chew on figs while muttering about the day's heat. Marcus had observed how the old men in togas favored a paste of crushed bone, its gritty texture leaving a faint chill on the tongue. He whispered to himself that a combination of the two might coax a brighter smile from the city's citizens. The idea settled like dust on the windowsill, quiet yet insistent, when the magistrate announced a public contest to devise the most effective mouth care. A ripple of curiosity rippled through the crowd. Workshops filled with the sound of mortars beating against stone, and the air grew heavy with the metallic tang of iron tools. Marcus felt the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders as seasoned pharmacists presented fragrant herbal pastes, their aromas of myrrh and sandalwood wafting confidently. Yet his own mixture lay in a simple wooden bowl, its dark surface absorbing the lantern light, and his hands trembled as he stirred the charcoal and bone powder together. The deadline loomed, a low ticking that matched the steady heartbeat of the city's fountains, urging him to perfect the blend before sunrise. Doubt whispered softly, but the crowd's murmur kept the tension thin and palpable. On the day of judgment, the judges lifted the first paste, a polished honey-infused concoction that glittered like sunrise on polished armor. Its sweet scent induced smiles, yet when the participants rinsed, the taste lingered with a lingering sweetness that clung to the palate like syrup on a cup. When Marcus presented his modest charcoal bone paste, the judges noted the dim color and the faint, chalky feel, a stark contrast to the gleaming rivals. A ripple of suppressed chuckles passed through the onlookers, as if the dark mixture were a joke in a festival of gold. Yet as each test volunteer brushed the paste across teeth, a cool, subtly abrasive sensation spread, and a faint whitening emerged on the enamel, steady as a river's glide over stone. The irony settled like a soft sigh. The simplest, roughest ingredients produced the clearest result, and the crowd's laughter softened into thoughtful nods. The magistrate's voice, low and measured, announced Marcus's formula the victor, and the forum settled into a gentle rustle of approval. Apprentices gathered around his workbench, their fingers tracing the gritty texture, while the sun painted long shadows across the dust-covered floor. In the weeks that followed, the charcoal bone paste was mixed in communal vats, the clinking of wooden spoons echoing the rhythm of daily chores. Citizens began to line up at the market stalls, the quiet murmur of conversation blending with the soft scrape of teeth against wooden cups as they tried the new paste. A sense of civic pride settled like a warm blanket, each smile slightly brighter, each greeting a little more measured. The city's walls seemed to breathe steadier, the marble cool beneath the lingering heat of noon, while the practice spread quietly from province to province. Years later, when the empire's edges shifted and marble columns fell silent, the memory of Marcus's charcoal blend lingered in the quiet corners of homes. Elderly hands still dusted teeth with the same gritty paste, the texture now familiar as the feel of worn parchment. The practice had become more than a health routine. It was a subtle reminder of the city's capacity to find elegance in modest means. Children watched their grandparents brush, the soft brushing sound like distant waves, and learned that pride could be rooted in simple, shared rituals. In the stillness of twilight, the streets echoed with the faint scrape of brushes, a gentle testimony that even the smallest effort can leave a lasting gleam on stone and soul. The white smile, once a contest's trophy, settled into the collective memory as a quiet monument to human imperfection and the patient endurance of everyday care. In the soft chill of spring, the 12th century village of Gradle woke to the faint creak of shutters. Young healer Aldrich knelt by the birch grove, feeling the cool bark against his palm. He plucked a slender twig. Its white fibers whispered as he ran them between his teeth, loosening dull grit that had settled like dust. The sensation was mild, a gentle scraping that left his mouth tingling with the faint taste of sap. When he returned to the stone cottage, he tucked the twig into a woven pouch, believing the modest branch might ease the ache that haunted many mouths. At the communal well, Aldrich offered the birch twig to his neighbors, his voice low as the water's murmur. The villagers gathered, eyes flicking from the twine to the rough hands that held it, skeptical of such a delicate instrument. Merk the blacksmith scoffed, the clang of his hammer echoing his doubt, insisting that only the sharp edge of iron could rid plaque. He tried the twig, feeling the soft fibers against his enamel, and recoiled as a faint sting rose, his brow furrowing. Whispered mutters rose like wind through reeds, and the tension lingered, each participant watching the healer's calm as if waiting for failure. Later that afternoon, an elderly shepherd named Lysa amused by the commotion, produced a small fragment of animal bone she had carved for carving whistles. She brushed the bone across her teeth, the hard surface clicking against porcelain, and a sudden crack echoed, sending a shiver through the crowd. The villagers stared, half horrified, half bemused, as Lisa's grin widened, revealing a gap where a tooth had surrendered to the stubborn tool. The irony settled like soot. The quest for cleanliness had produced a new flaw, and the simple birch twig lay untouched, its fibers still pristine. Laughter, low and sleepy, drifted over the thatched roofs, softening the earlier sharpness of doubt. As dusk settled, the fire in the great hall glowed amber, casting gentle shadows on the stone walls. Aldrich placed a bundle of fresh birch twigs on the communal bench, the scent of sap mingling with roasting venison. One by one, villagers reached for a twig, feeling the cool, fibrous tip glide along their gums, the slight rasp a quiet reminder of morning's promise. The room filled with the hushed rhythm of brushing, the occasional crack of firewood, and the low murmur of contented conversation. In that steady, unhurried motion, the earlier tension dissolved, leaving only the soft cadence of daily care. When the moon rose pale over the treetops, Aldrich walked the narrow lane, his boots stirring the damp earth with each step. He reflected on how a humble branch had sparked debate, humor, and finally a shared routine, a small illustration of human yearning for comfort. The village slept, teeth lightly cleaned by birch, while the night air carried the faint rustle of leaves, as if the forest itself whispered approval. He understood that progress often arrived on simple, unassuming carriers, and that acceptance grew not from grand gestures, but from the patient repetition of ordinary acts. The quiet of the night wrapped the hamlet like a blanket, reminding each sleeper that even minor fibers could hold a quiet strength. At the edge of the mist-shrouded valley, the stone cloisters of St. Brigid breathed a slow, cool air that carried the scent of damp herbs. Brother Edric, whose hands were accustomed to the rough texture of parchment, began each dawn by selecting slender birch twigs, testing their pliancy against the back of his teeth. He soaked the twigs in a warm infusion of rosemary and sage, feeling the faint heat rise from the basin as the leaves released their aroma. In the quiet of the refectory, he traced the gentle motions of the twig, listening to the soft scrape that echoed like a whispered prayer. By midday, he recorded the observations in a vellum codex, noting the subtle change in breath freshness and the faint tingling that followed each scrape. Word of Edric's method drifted beyond the cloister walls, reaching the cramped stall of an apothecary named Aldrich, whose own remedies relied on powdered bone fragments. Aldrich watched from his crooked doorway as monks gathered around the monk, their eyes bright with curiosity, and he felt a flicker of unease rise, like a thin leaf in the wind. He approached the abbot with a petition, offering a counter-cure of crushed animal bone, insisting that the twig practice was merely a novelty. The abbot, patient but wary, asked Aldrich to demonstrate his version before the brethren, creating a subtle tension that settled like dust on the stone floor. As the apothecary prepared his mixture, the clink of bone against mortar sounded a muted challenge to the serenity of the monks. When Aldrich finally presented his bone paste, a thin film of dampness glistened on the wooden bench, and the monks leaned in with polite anticipation. The paste, when applied with a blunt stick, left a gritty residue that sparked a slight cough among the listeners, the sound barely louder than a soft sigh. Edric, observing from a shadowed column, noted the irony that the attempt to outshine a simple twig resulted in a mouthful of harsh texture, the very opposite of the clean breath they cherished. The monks exchanged quiet smiles, the humor unspoken, as the aroma of burnt marrow mingled with the lingering rosemary, creating an oddly comforting scent. Aldrich, flustered yet composed, withdrew his offering, the tension dissolving into a shared, gentle chuckle that echoed faintly off the cold walls. In the days that followed, the monastery returned to its measured rhythm, the twig ritual becoming a quiet staple of the monks' mornings. Edric refined the herb blend, adding a pinch of dried lavender that brushed his fingertips with a faint violet hue as he tossed it into the warm water. The twigs, now lightly scented, glided through the monks' mouths with a soft, rustling whisper, the sound reminiscent of pages turning in an ancient manuscript. The apothecary, observing from afar, chose to keep his distance, allowing the monks' modest practice to settle like a warm stone in the courtyard. The cloister's stone corridors retained the faint fragrance of herbs, a subtle reminder of the balance between simple craft and elaborate ambition. Years later, the vellum codex that Edric had begun to fill lay preserved on a shelf, its pages yellowed but still legible, chronicling each measured observation with careful ink strokes. Scholars who later turned its pages felt the quiet persistence of a monk's curiosity, the slow ripple of a single twig's movement across centuries. The story of the twig, the rival, and the eventual calm became a modest lesson in humility, illustrating how even the smallest gestures can echo louder than grand gestures made in haste. The monks continued their nightly prayers, their teeth brushed by fragrant twigs, unaware that their routine had become a quiet testament to patience. In the lingering hush of the evenings, one could almost hear the stone walls sigh, content with the simple, enduring rhythm of human imperfection. The caravan crested the low hill as the evening sun stretched amber across the thatch roofs of Brindleford. A merchant from distant Harrogate unloaded a wooden crate, revealing polished bone sticks carved from stag antlers, their surfaces worn smooth by countless journeys. Children pressed their noses to the open lid, inhaling the faint scent of pine sap and dry leather. Aldrich, the village barber, ran a fingertip over a bone pick, feeling the cool, grainy texture that contrasted with the familiar green twigs he kept in his drawer. He offered a quiet smile, noting how the bone seemed to promise a steadier scrape against enamel. The market square hummed with low chatter as the day waned into a soft, amber hush. Later that afternoon, Edric, the blacksmith's son, lifted a sprig of fresh willow and jabbed it gently into a chipped molar of an elderly farmer, the twig flexing with a quiet snap. He turned to Aldrich, voice low but steady, and declared that the supple twigs taught the mouth the patience of bending, unlike the hard bone which could bruise. Aldrich replied that the bone's firmness offered a cleaner cut, a fact his trade had long relied upon, and the two men's eyes met over the modest crowd gathering near the well. The villagers leaned in, their breath forming faint clouds, as whispers rose like wind through wheat, each side measuring the other's words. The dispute grew not in volume, but in the steady rhythm of hands gesturing, the clink of a distant hammer punctuating the argument. Even as the sun slipped lower, the tension lingered, a subtle crack in the otherwise smooth routine of village life. As the evening deepened, a stray wind lifted the dust from the cobblestones, scattering the bone picks across the market stalls like pale feathers. One of the picks, struck by a careless foot, snapped cleanly, its broken tip landing with a soft thud on the stone. The crowd smiled faintly, noting the irony that the instrument prized for its durability had yielded so easily to a simple stumble. Aldrich crouched to pick up the fragment, its edge catching the dim light, and handed it to Edric, who examined it with a bemused glance. Their laughter was muted, a rustle of cloth, and the distant croak of a nightjar, underscoring how the argument had become a small theater of human quirks rather than a fierce contest. The villagers, feeling the absurdity, began to share their own humble tools, chewed reeds, smooth river stones, each story weaving into a quiet tapestry of shared imperfection. In the calm that followed, the two men set the remaining bone sticks and twigs side by side on a low wooden table, the wood warm from the day's sun. They each took a turn demonstrating a gentle scrape on a wooden tooth model, the sound a soft rasp that faded into the evening hush. The villagers watched, eyes half closed, the air air scented with smoke from a nearby hearth, and found comfort in the rhythm rather than the result. Aldrich nodded to Edric, a quiet acknowledgement that both tools served the same purpose, merely echoing different habits. The market stall lights flickered, casting amber halos that blended the bone and twig into one mellow shade, and the conversation drifted toward the coming harvest instead of the earlier discord. Night settled over Brindleford, and the stone walls of the cottages kept the chill at bay, while the villagers retired to their modest beds. Aldrich, seated by a low fire, traced the smooth curve of a bone pick in his palm, feeling its coolness against his skin and recalling the afternoon's gentle rivalry. He thought of how the smallest objects, twigs, bone, even a broken fragment, could stir echoes of pride and humility within a community that otherwise moved in steady, unhurried steps. The memory lingered like the faint scent of rosemary from the herb garden, a reminder that human debates are often as transient as the breath on a cold pane. In the quiet darkness, the village seemed to breathe as one, each heart beating in a rhythm that honored both the hard and the supple. Thus the story of bone and twig settled into the soft fabric of everyday life, a modest lesson folded into the quilt of history. As the midsummer sun slipped toward the horizon, the market square filled with the low murmur of merchants and the clink of wooden cups. Aldrich, the town's seasoned brushmaker, laid out bundles of supple willow twigs on a rough-hewn table, their green tips glinting in the fading light. Beside him, Edric, a quiet bone carver, arranged thin shavings of deer rib, each fragment cool to the touch and faintly scented with pine. Children gathered, their eyes following the slow rhythm of the craftsmen as they demonstrated the gentle sweep of twigs across wooden teeth replicas. The air carried a faint aroma of baked barley and rosemary, setting a calm backdrop for the day's modest ceremony. Midway through the feast, a hushed gasp rose from the crowd as several villagers winced, clutching their jaws in sudden pain. The sound of grinding molars echoed faintly, a low thrum that contrasted with the distant lute playing a lullaby. Aldrich felt his own fingers tremble when a neighbor pressed a swollen cheek against his palm, the skin warm and slick with sweat. Edric, noticing the growing unease, exchanged a brief, steady glance with Aldrich, their eyes reflecting a shared urgency. The swelling crowd gathered around, the murmuring turning to restless shuffling, as the first hints of panic brushed the edges of the celebration. In a moment that seemed both absurd and inevitable, Aldrich lifted a twig, its tip soft as a whisper, while Edric offered a slender bone shard, pale and smooth like river stone. They began to work side by side, the twig sweeping in slow arcs across open mouths, the bone scraping with a delicate rasp that sounded like dry leaves on stone. The townsfolk watched, eyebrows raised in quiet amusement as the two methods, one humble, the other slightly daring, joined in a synchronized dance. A faint smile crept across an old baker's face as he felt the cool bite of the bone against his sore gums. A subtle chuckle spreading through the crowd. The irony of the scene lay in its simplicity. A modest festival turned into a makeshift clinic where ancient tools met an unexpected partnership. Soon the collective sigh of relief settled over the square, a soft exhale that mingled with the evening breeze rustling the tapestry banners. The lingering ache faded, replaced by a gentle tingling as the twig and bone cleared debris, leaving a faint taste of earth and pine on the participants' tongues. Aldrich and Edric lowered their implements, their hands resting on the table, the wood warm from the day's work. The lute resumed its lull, its notes now bearing a slower, more contented tempo, while villagers returned to their plates, the clatter of spoons quieter and more measured. The festival continued, bathed in amber light, each smile a quiet testament to the shared perseverance of ordinary hands. When the stars emerged, a hushed quiet settled, and the townsfolk lingered over empty cups, reflecting on the day's small drama. They spoke in low tones about the fragility of comfort, the way a simple twig or a bone could become a bridge between pain and ease. Aldrich and Edric, now seated side by side, exchanged a nod that hinted at an unspoken respect for each other's craft. The night air held a faint chill, reminding everyone of the impermanence of relief and the steady cadence of daily life. In the lingering glow, the festival became a quiet lesson that human ingenuity, however modest, often finds its shape in the ordinary moments we barely notice. The first mornings in the river settlement began with the soft rustle of willow twigs pressed between fingertips, each slender piece dipped in water, as if coaxing a secret from the mouth. Women gathered beside the stone well, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint tang of fermented porridge, while children watched the slow, deliberate motions. The twigs, still green and pliant, scraped the enamel with a measured patience that matched the village's tempo. Little cracks appeared, unnoticed, as the habit became a ritual as regular as the bell that marked the passing of the day. In the quiet of the courtyard, the sound of a twig snapping against tooth echoed like a modest percussion, marking the first humble step toward organized hygiene. Those simple gestures, unnoticed by distant travelers, laid the groundwork for a practice that would, in time, be recorded in ink as the joint method of using paired twigs spread from mother to daughter. A murmuring discontent rose among the older craftsmen who still favored rough hemp ropes. The market square filled with quiet arguments, the clink of copper needles against wooden stalls punctuating the air as guild aspirants pressed their petitions before a council of seasoned barbers. A parchment codex, newly drafted by a scribe with calloused fingers, listed measurements and angles, and its arrival caused a subtle fissure between tradition and innovation. Some apprentices, weary from long hours, whispered that the new technique threatened their livelihood, their breaths fogging in the chill of the early dawn. The tension lingered like a thin veil of mist over the river, stirring the soot-colored water of the well without ever breaking its surface. Yet the promise of cleaner teeth, reflected in the dull shine of copper tools, kept the debate poised rather than eruptive. It was ironic that the very guild formed to protect the old ways soon embraced the oddity of animal bones, their sharpened ends polished to a matte glow. The codex, once guarded zealously, was copied by itinerant monks whose faces remained hidden in shadow, their hands moving ink across vellum with the same patience they gave to candle making. Villagers observed the bone tools being wielded with a gentle rhythm, the faint crack of bone against enamel sounding like distant wind through hollowed trees. The same hands that once clutched twigs now cradled marrow-etched instruments, their fingertips stained with a soft amber hue, as if fate had nudged them toward a quieter efficiency. In the marketplace, the irony settled like dust on the stones. The pursuit of cleanliness had become a modest trade, quietly profitable, yet unassuming, with the guild's statutes inscribed and the bone implements distributed. Daily life settled into a new cadence that felt both familiar and subtly altered. Morning meals were accompanied by the low murmur of teeth being brushed, the sound a soft swish that blended with the clatter of wooden spoons and the occasional laugh of a child. Artisans repaired leather belts while patrons waited, their eyes occasionally drifting to the polished bone tool resting on the counter, its surface warm from recent use. The codex traveled from hamlet to manor, its pages turned by curious clerks in dimly lit rooms, each copy reinforcing the gentle spread of the practice across the realm. Even the river, once a mere backdrop, now reflected the pale glow of lanterns that guided night-time cleaners back to their homes. The rhythm of the days, neither hurried nor stagnant, carried the quiet assurance that hygiene had become an unremarkable, yet steadfast part of medieval routine. In quiet retrospection, the slow transition from twigs to animal bones appears as a modest carving upon the flesh of history, a line drawn with deliberate patience rather than flamboyant flourish. The guild's quiet legacy persists in the faint impressions left on parchment, reminding later scholars that progress often springs from the simple act of cleaning a single tooth. Travelers passing through the region now note the soft click of bone against enamel as a background note to their journeys, barely audible but unmistakably present. The codex, now weathered and reproduced countless times, stands as a testament to human imperfection, tempered by collective care. As the night deepens and the river's surface smooths, the story settles into the hush of a world that, despite its flaws, continues to tend to its own small, enduring details. In the cool mist that lingered over the Sumerian floodplain, a young apothecary named Enkidu crouched by a shallow well, his hands coated in fine dust from crushed animal bones. He added golden honey, stirring the mixture with a reed until a faint, gritty paste formed. It scent both sweet and earthy. The elders of the tribe gathered, their eyes soft in the early dawn, watching as Enkidu pressed the paste onto a chipped reed brush. When he brushed the paste across a weathered tooth, a faint grating sound rose, and the sour taste of decay seemed to melt away. A quiet murmur of approval floated on the still air, marking the first humble toothpaste among the people. Soon after, word of the new scrub traveled through the mud brick lanes, and a sudden surge of dental complaints arrived like the river's flood. The tribal elders, wary of unknown remedies, pressed the paste harder, the coarse grains scraping against enamel with a rasp that echoed in the courtyard. Hands that had once steadied clay pots now trembled as the paste left tiny flecks on the gums, and a low tension grew among the listeners. Children winced, and the scent of honey was overrun by the sharper bite of bone, raising whispered doubts about the safety of the experiment. Yet the lingering ache of decay forced the community to persist, each attempt sharpening the line between curiosity and discomfort. Ironically, the very sweetness that coaxed the villagers to taste the paste became its most amusing flaw. The honey clung to the brush, leaving a sticky residue that dripped onto woven mats. Elders chuckled in subdued tones as the paste left pale, chalky streaks on their teeth, looking like faint clouds on a sunrise sky. The abrasive feeling sparked an outburst of giggles from the youngest, who compared the sensation to brushing sand on a riverbank. While the elders muttered about the mess, the quiet irony lay in the fact that a mixture meant to silence decay now announced its presence through a bright, uncomfortable sparkle. The scene settled into a gentle parody of ritual, each participant aware of the absurd balance between relief and irritation. With time, the rhythm of the morning rite softened, and the paste became a quiet companion to the daily gathering of water and grain. Enkidu's reed brush, now worn smooth, passed from hand to hand, its tip leaving a faint, creamy film that glistened briefly before disappearing into the night's cool breath. The tribe's ceramic jars held the paste in modest amounts, their interiors stained with a soft, amber hue, while the sound of soft brushing blended with the distant lowing of cattle. The ritual settled into a calm cadence, a small, steady act that anchored the community's sense of well-being. In the stillness of the evening, the scent of honey lingered faintly, a reminder of the first gentle victory over decay. Centuries later, in distant laboratories lit by electric glow, chemists measured fluoride and glycerin, shaping gels that slipped from tubes like clear water. Yet the core intention remained unchanged, a quiet resistance to rot, a soft persistence in the face of time. Modern brushes, sleek and plastic, echo the ancient reed's tremor as they glide across teeth, leaving behind a thin veil of protection. The world now watches the same sunrise over mouths, though the materials have shifted from bone to chemistry, from honey to mint. In this steady continuum, history sighs with a gentle melancholy, recognizing that even as tools evolve, the human desire for a clean, untroubled smile endures in a whisper of continuity. When the first caravan left the riverbank, where Enkidu's line first harvested bone powder, the air tasted of dry sand, and the faint scent of crushed mint leaf that clung to the ropes. The travelers moved silently across the steppe, their sandals stirring fine dust that settled on jars of powdered marrow. At each oasis, they exchanged the white grit for fragrant herbs gathered by desert women, whose hands brushed the coarse cloth like a soft sigh. The trade was measured in small gestures, a handful of charcoal for a bundle of rosemary, a measured scoop of dried sage for a sack of bone dust. By night, the firelight revealed faces half hidden in shadow, each smile worn as lightly as the paste they would someday create. The wind grew hotter as the caravan turned toward the coast, and the rhythm of the camels' hooves sounded like a nervous heartbeat against the stone. Scarcity crept in when a storm washed away a cache of mint, leaving the traders to barter their precious bone powder for coarse charcoal that smelled of burnt wood. Voices rose in low dispute at the market stalls of Tyre, where merchants argued the merits of bitter sage over sweet peppermint, their words cracking like dry twigs. The tension lingered in the air, a thin layer of dust that settled on the parchment contracts and on the rough palms of the traders. Yet, even amid the uneasy negotiations, the faint clink of a pearl jar being lifted hinted at a different kind of ambition, beyond the simple exchange of ingredients. In Alexandria, a rival healer observed the desert trade from his balcony, his laboratory window framing a sea that glittered like powdered pearl under the noon sun. He ground small shards of pearl into a fine luminescent powder, mixing it with a slurry of bone and a whisper of crushed rose petals, and the resulting paste caught the light with a soft iridescence. The irony was palpable when the very people who had prized the harsh charcoal now sought the gentle shimmer of pearl for fresher breath. As if the sparkle could mask the ordinary grit of daily life, word of his creation traveled back across the dunes, carried by a wind that seemed to sigh at the absurdity of elegance rising from simple necessity. The healer's quiet smile suggested that progress often arrives wrapped in the unexpected, a modest glimmer against the backdrop of relentless trade. Later, families along the Levanten coast settled into a steady rhythm, blending the desert's charcoal with the Alexandria pearl paste, adding sprigs of mint that softened the bitterness with a cool, lingering chill. Each morning, mothers would grind the mixture on stone slabs, the sound of the pestle rolling like a gentle tide, while children watched with sleepy eyes, the scent of herb and bone filling the modest kitchen. The paste settled into small ceramic pots that kept the temperature of the room, their surfaces warm to the touch after the ritual was complete. In the evenings, the soft glow of oil lamps illuminated faces that were neither triumphant nor sorrowful, simply engaged in the quiet act of cleaning teeth before sleep. This calm routine marked a subtle shift from competition to communal care, a shared habit that linked generations across miles of sand and sea. Centuries later, the lineage of those early blends arrived in glass tubes of fluoride gel, their color a muted teal that reflected the same steady light that once danced on pearl. Modern hands still press the paste onto bristles, feeling the cool viscosity slip between fingers much as the ancient mortars had. The quiet irony remains. A formula once forged from bone and mint now rests on a synthetic base, yet the purpose stays unchanged, a humble quest for a cleaner smile. As the world hums louder around them, the old ritual endures in the stillness of a bathroom mirror, the reflection of a face that is both ancient and new. In that moment, history feels like a patient observer, smiling faintly at the continuity of small, imperfect human efforts. In the dim light of early villages, people scraped chalky ash and powdered animal bones into their hands, feeling the gritty texture against their fingertips. They pressed the coarse paste onto cracked enamel, hearing only the faint scrape of teeth against stone. The scent of burnt marrow drifted through the thatch-roofed huts, a reminder of the day's fire. Though the mixture offered a momentary coolness, the taste lingered like damp earth, and the ache in the jaw persisted. These humble attempts marked the first unsteady step toward a ritual that would later be called toothpaste. Within the stone walls of a secluded monastery, Brother Aldrich began to stir zinc oxide into a warm infusion of sage and rosemary. The copper pot humming softly, the bright powder tinged the liquid a pale gray, and the scent of herbaceous steam rose like a quiet prayer. The abbot's eyes lingered on the experiment, suspicion flickering in the candlelight as rumors of heretical alchemy whispered through cloister corridors. Meanwhile, a wave of toothaches swept the neighboring villages, each sigh and muffled groan echoing against the cold stone of the infirmary. Aldrich's careful rub of the paste on a fellow monk's molar produced a faint fizz, a subtle relief that contrasted with the lingering tension in the cloister. Word of the modest gel slipped through the chaptered doors of the monastery, carried on the backs of itinerant lay brothers, who brushed it onto their own teeth before setting out. Ironically, the very same officials who warned against unsanctioned potions began to notice fewer complaints of gnawing pain in the refectory. A quiet chuckle passed among the younger monks as they watched the abbot's stern face soften while polishing the simple ceramic jars. The paste, now known in hushed tones as the alchemist's secret, spread to nearby priories, its label written in a steady hand that barely concealed a smile. Trade began in the form of small clay pots exchanged for barley, an unremarkable transaction that nevertheless brightened the dim market stalls. The irony lay in how a modest blend of mineral and herbs softened both tooth and temper, while the grand hierarchies debated its legitimacy over stale wine. Dawn settled over the cloister as monks gathered around a low wooden table, their hands moving in a rhythmic grind that turned raw zinc ore into fine powder. The cool metal brushed against their palms, and the faint metallic clang resonated like a distant bell. Each day they blended the powder with warm water and a drizzle of honey, watching the mixture thicken into a smooth, amber paste that glistened in the morning light. The jars were stacked neatly on stone shelves, their lids sealed with wax that crackled softly when lifted. Over time, a modest demand grew among laypeople who visited the infirmary, seeking the soothing glide of the paste on sore gums, and the monastery began to note modest coin in its ledger. The calm routine persisted, the quiet commerce becoming a subtle thread that linked the ancient practice of grinding bones to the emerging notion of a marketable hygiene product. Centuries later, the lineage of Aldrich's humble gel could be traced through parchment recipes to the sleek tubes of modern fluoride gels that now sit on bathroom counters. The bright, minty foam that bubbles under a brush still carries the faint memory of zinc's cool grain, now tempered by scientific precision. Yet the same deliberate pace, mix, test, share, remains unseen in the hurried rhythm of contemporary life, a reminder that progress often walks on a slow, steady tread. Museums now display a cracked ceramic jar beside a polished plastic tube. The contrast echoing the quiet continuity of human desire for comfort against pain. In the soft glow of museum lights, visitors pause, feeling the subtle weight of history in the simple act of cleaning one's teeth. The story settles like a whispered sigh, suggesting that even the most ordinary of rituals bears the imprint of countless hands that once brushed, grounded, and quietly hoped for relief. The soot-gray skyline of Manchester in the 1860s was punctuated by low brick factories humming with steam. Inside one such plant, copper rollers pressed softened chalk and powdered charcoal into a smooth paste that was squeezed into slender tin tubes. Workers in coarse wool coats felt the cool, gritty mixture slide between their fingers as they cleaned the metal molds. The paste, scented with peppermint oil, was marketed as a convenient way to scrub the teeth after each evening meal. Though the tubes clinked together in orderly rows, the public still brushed with crushed bone powder and honey, uncertain of the mechanical promise. In the quiet dusk of the workshop, the faint clatter of pistons seemed to echo the slow, deliberate rhythm of daily hygiene. In 1884, Dr. Clara Finch, a chemist with steady hands and a habit of turning over copper beakers at night, noticed a faint mineral sheen in a sample of river water near the factory. She extracted a crystal that glimmered like frozen dew, and, after grinding it into the paste, observed a subtle smoothness on the enamel of a test tooth she held against the lamplight. The laboratory air grew crisp as she recorded the increase in hardness, her notebook capturing the quiet triumph of a single measured drop. When she presented the findings to the company's board, the room filled with whispered doubts, the clatter of pencils, and the rustle of newspapers reporting a dangerous new element. Debate rose like steam from the boilers, with physicians arguing over safety, while factory owners weighed profit against the uncertain glow of fluoride. Yet Finch remained composed, her voice a low murmur that brushed the tension away as gently as the paste brushed teeth. In the following months, advertisements sprang up in modest Gazette columns, depicting smiling mothers handing tin tubes to their children, while footnotes warned of excessive use may cause a sparkle in the smile. The public, accustomed to the gritty texture of bone powder, found the smooth gel oddly comforting, as if a soft sigh had replaced the harsh rasp of early brushes. Ironically, the very critics who proclaimed the fluoride a potential poison were seen drinking water flavored with a hint of mint. Their own hands stained by the same paste they condemned. At a town hall meeting, a skeptical dentist tapped his cane on the floor, the sound echoing like a distant train. Yet he lifted a tube to examine its pale interior, his eyes softening. The juxtaposition of fear and fascination settled into a quiet hum, the factory whistles continuing their regular call, as if unaware of the moral wobble they had sparked. By evening, the streets glowed amber, and families brushed together in dim kitchens, the gentle swish of the gel a lullaby to the day's unrest. Within a year, the manufacturing line was retooled, the brass gears humming a steadier rhythm as fluoride crystals were blended in measured doses. Workers learned to handle the new ingredient with gloved fingers, feeling the cool powder slip like fine sand through their palms. The tin tubes, now stamped with a simple leaf motif, traveled by horse-drawn carts to small pharmacies, where clerks placed them on polished wooden counters. Customers, after a brief pause, took the tubes home, the soft click of the latch resonating like a quiet promise each night before bed. In households, the paste sang a muted tune against enamel, the faint fizz of fluoride mixing with saliva, a barely perceptible sigh. The city's soot seemed a little less oppressive, as if the collective act of brushing had brushed away a layer of grimy expectation. Decades later, the generation that grew up with those modest tin tubes displayed teeth that retained their brightness longer than any of their ancestors' records could show. Historians, leafing through faded ledgers, noted the gradual decline of tooth extractions in municipal infirmaries. A quiet statistic whispered in the corridors of old hospitals. Finch's name appeared in a footnote beside factory ledgers, her portrait blurred by the passage of time. Yet her contribution lingered in the smooth glide of daily routines. The moral settled like settled dust on a windowsill. Small shifts in material, observed with patience, could alter the course of ordinary lives without fanfare. Evening light filtered through soot-stained panes, casting a warm amber glow on families who, after meals, still paused to swish the gel, their motions as measured as the ticking of an old clock. In that stillness, history seemed to exhale, content that the world had found a quiet way to protect smiles amidst endless industry. In the dim light of a Neolithic hearth, women ground pale marrow fragments into a gritty paste that tasted of earth and whispered of cleanliness. The paste was pressed between finger and tooth, its cold grains scraping the enamel like a handful of river stones. Elders watched the ritual with a steady gaze, noting the faint sputter of ash as the mixture dissolved in spittle. This early toothpaste, born of necessity, carried the scent of animal hide and the rough texture of crushed bone. The quiet exchange of the paste from one hand to another felt like a promise that the next sunrise would be met with a less bitter bite. History, patient as stone, recorded the moment with the soft rustle of animal skins and the muted clink of bone on stone. Centuries later, the clatter of metal workshops echoed through bustling bazaars where copper tubes began to hold powdered chalk and salt. A merchant named Silas, his beard stained with lime, measured each scoop with a trembling balance, aware that the new formula could erode gums as swiftly as it brightened smiles. The air in the apothecary grew heavy with the sharp scent of vinegar and the faint hiss of boiling water, heightening the sense that progress bore a price. Travelers whispered of strange powders that left a tingling burn, a reminder that novelty often rides on a thin line between benefit and discomfort. The tension of this era settled like dust on the shelves, waiting for a calmer hand to steady the mixture. By the early 20th century, sleek glass tubes clinked softly on polished counters, their pastel colors promising a future as smooth as silk. Yet the same hands that prized the glossy design often brushed the gel hurriedly, missing the gentle pause that once marked each brushing ritual. Nanoparticles, invisible as breath, swirled within the gel, promising to seal cavities, while the market flooded with flavors of mint that tasted more like confection than care. Advertisements sang in bright fonts about instant brilliance, while the quiet kitchen sink collected the discarded caps with a resigned sigh. The irony lay in the fact that brighter smiles were now sold alongside coffee cups, each brightening a moment, but rarely extending the calm of a thoughtful pause. Observers noted the soft chuckle of the world as it chased the sparkle, unaware that the original bone paste had been a patient, tactile companion in a modern courtyard, a global festival unfolded beneath lanterns that glowed amber, where artisans displayed tubes of gel beside woven baskets of ancient bone dust. Side by side, the soft murmur of multilingual voices blended with the gentle clack of porcelain cups, as participants sampled personalized flavors that balanced citrus zest with a whisper of herbal calm. Children watched elders demonstrate the slow, circular motion of brushing, the rhythm echoing the slow tide that brushed the shore earlier in the day. The atmosphere settled into a comfortable hum, the scent of warm tea mingling with faint lavender from the toothpaste dispensers, creating a tapestry of scent that felt both new and familiar. In that quiet celebration, the evolution of toothpaste seemed less a race and more a shared breath, a collective exhale of contentment. As night deepened, the lanterns dimmed, and the festival's last volunteers folded their empty tubes into modest satchels, each one a quiet record of the day's gentle progress. The lingering aroma of mint and earth lingered in the cool air, reminding listeners that every innovation carries the weight of its ancestors' rough hands. Scholars, seated on stone benches, traced the lineage from marrow dust to fluoride gel, noting how each step was a patient negotiation between comfort and science. They spoke of a future where personalized gel blends might respond to the subtle tremor of a nervous bite, yet promised to keep the simple pleasure of a soft brushstroke alive. The night's silence wrapped the crowd like a soft blanket, the only sound the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional gentle sigh of contented teeth. In that reflective pause, humanity recognized that the brightest smile is not the flash of a tube, but the steady glow of a habit nurtured through ages. The whispering river wound lazily through a valley brushed in morning mist, its banks speckled with wild grasses that brushed the ankles of those who walked them. Young healer Ashan knelt beside a shallow pool, watching a herd of antelope pause and then stride away, leaving behind a faint, powdery residue that glimmered like frost on the river stones. The white dust settled on the soft soil, catching the weak sun and stirring a faint, metallic scent that rose with the cool air. Asha brushed a fingertip across the powder, feeling its gritty texture shift between her thumb and forefinger. The village had no written record of such a find, only the quiet, patient observation of the land itself. When Asha brought the dust to the communal fire, the elders gathered, their faces half hidden in the amber glow, their voices low as the river's own murmur. They recounted a myth whispered through generations, unseen tooth spirits, sharp as the antelope's horns, slipped into the mouths of children, bringing ache that could not be soothed by herbs alone. The elders' eyes flickered with a mixture of caution and curiosity, aware that the belief held the power to calm frantic mothers. Asha listened, feeling the weight of expectation settle like a soft blanket over her shoulders. The tension lingered, a quiet drum beneath the fire's crackle, as the village considered whether to trust the ancient warning. It was oddly humorous that the very dust left by the antelope, nothing more than ground bone fragments, was now hailed as a weapon against invisible spirits. The elders chuckled softly, their laughter rustling like dry leaves, as they imagined the spirits being chased away by the gritty paste. Yet the ritual demanded precise measurement, the careful grinding of the powder with river stones, a process that turned a mundane residue into a sacred concoction. The irony lay in the fact that the dust, common to the valley, held no magical essence, only the collective belief of the people. As the mixture was prepared, the air filled with a faint, earthy aroma that seemed to affirm the absurdity and the earnestness of the act alike. When the ritual began, the village women sat side by side, their hands moving in a slow, synchronized rhythm, the stone pestle pressing against the mortar with a soft, steady thud. The dust turned into a paste that clung to the palms, cool to the touch, and was then brushed gently onto the children's gums. The contact barely audible over the river's sigh. The firelight painted calm shadows on the faces of onlookers, their expressions a blend of sleepy patience and quiet concentration. Minutes slipped by, each one marked by the faint sound of breath and the occasional rustle of woven mats. The whole scene unfolded with a deliberate, unhurried pace, as if time itself were taking a brief, restorative pause. Days later, the children laughed with fewer grimaces, their cheeks flushed with the soft warmth of health that seemed to confirm the elder's tale. A Shah watched them play near the river, the dust now blended into the earth, unnoticed by those who passed by. She felt a gentle melancholy, aware that the belief persisted not because of certainty, but because it had stitched the community together in moments of shared care. The river continued its quiet song, indifferent yet ever present, as the village carried on, its rituals a quiet echo of ancient whispers. In the stillness of twilight, a Shah understood that the true power lay not in the powder, but in the steady, patient hands that chose to believe and act together. At the edge of the riverbank, the village of Luma stirred in the amber light of late afternoon, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint tang of ash from the hearths. A Shah, the keeper of oral health rites, arranged a shallow wooden bowl beside the communal fire, its surface still warm from the day's cooking. She brushed fine powder made from crushed marrow bones into the bowl, the granules catching the flicker of flame like tiny constellations. The elders watched from a low seat, their faces softened by shadow, while the children's hands traced idle patterns in the dust. In this quiet tableau, the ritual of cleaning teeth with bone dust felt both ordinary and ancient, a rhythm that had measured generations. The stillness shattered when Koro, a broad-shouldered warrior from the neighboring tribe, crossed the clearing with a chuckle that rattled the dry leaves. He circled the fire, eyes gleaming with mockery, and demanded to see the teeth of a man who had never tasted blood, insisting that the practice was no more than superstition. A Shah felt the weight of his challenge settle like a stone in her palm, and she answered that proof required the very bones of their revered ancestors, the same ones Koro dismissed as relics. The elders murmured about the taboo of disturbing the dead, their voices low like distant drums, while the wind whispered through the reeds, reminding everyone of the fragile balance between reverence and curiosity. Tension rose, measured not by shouts, but by the steady breathing of those who understood the cost of breaking a pact with the unseen. As Asha set out to collect the scattered fragments, the irony of the situation unfolded quietly. The warrior who mocked the ritual now watched her hand linger on a stone slab where a blurred figure lay draped in woven cloth, its face hidden by the play of firelight. She lifted a small fragment of bone, feeling its cool texture against her fingertips, and wondered whether the spirits would interpret this act as theft or tribute. The path to the burial ground was lined with low grass that brushed her shins, each step echoing the soft rustle of centuries-old stories. Koro followed at a distance, his armor clinking faintly, yet his eyes softened as he observed the gentle reverence that guided her movements. The juxtaposition of skepticism and solemnity painted a scene where the absurdities of belief were met with a measured respect that neither party could fully articulate. Returning with the gathered relics, Asha placed the bones into the bowl, the powder now tinged with a faint ochre hue that seemed to warm under the fire's glow. She instructed the villagers to swish the mixture, the gritty sensation spreading across their tongues like cool river pebbles, while Koro watched his own reflection flicker in the ember-lit water. The elders whispered a quiet chant, their words barely audible, and the atmosphere settled into a soft hum, as though the spirits themselves were listening from the shadows. The ritual concluded without a single complaint, the warrior's earlier derision dissolving into a quiet smile that hinted at a newfound appreciation for the subtle efficacy of tradition. In the calm that followed, the fire crackled gently, casting a steady light that made the bone dust sparkle like distant stars on a calm night. When the night deepened and the fire dwindled to embers, the villagers gathered around, their faces illuminated by a low glow that made the lines of age appear softer, almost like the blurred silhouettes of ancient teachers. Asha reflected on the day's events, noting how the challenge had drawn the community closer to the practices they had long taken for granted, reminding them that humility could coexist with skepticism. The warrior, now seated quietly beside the fire, stroked his chin thoughtfully, his earlier brashness replaced by a patient stillness that seemed to echo the rhythm of the river beyond. The sense of continuity lingered, a gentle reminder that the smallest actions, scrubbing teeth with dust from forgotten bones, linked the living to the silent witnesses of the past. In the hush that settled over the village, the lesson was simple. Reverence is not a loud proclamation, but a soft, persistent pulse that keeps tradition alive. As the meteor shower painted thin silver lines across the darkened sky, the villagers of Lerna gathered around the central fire, their rough hands already dusted with powdered marrow. Asha, the designated keeper of the ritual, lifted a shallow bowl of bone dust, feeling its gritty coolness against her palm as the night wind whispered through the woven reeds. The elders recited the old verses, their voices low and steady, while children watched the flickering flames reflect on clay pots. The ritual demanded that each participant smear a thin paste of bone dust mixed with river water upon their gums, believing the powder would chase away decay as the meteors chased away darkness. The scent of ash mingled with the scent of fresh herbs growing near the well, a quiet perfume that lingered on the skin. Under the falling stars, the ceremony began with a measured rhythm, as if history itself were breathing slowly through the crowd. By the third night after the ceremony, a soft cough had risen from the hut of the potter, its rasp echoing faintly through the narrow lanes. Within hours, the cough traveled like a muted drumbeat, touching the mouths of the weavers and the fishermen who had brushed the paste against their teeth. The air grew heavier, carrying the faint metallic tang of bloodied cloths, as some complained of gum swelling that felt as if the bone dust had turned to grit in their mouths. Shadows gathered at the edges of the fire, and villagers exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring that the ancestors might be displeased with a ritual performed without proper balance. Asha felt the weight of those whispers settle on her shoulders, each word a stone pressed against her thoughts. The once steady rhythm of the ceremony faltered, replaced by a cautious hush as the community waited for an answer. In the dim storage room behind the granary, Asha uncovered a weather-worn tablet whose characters were half eroded by time, its surface cool to the touch, like a stone left in the night rain. The tablet spoke of a balancing ash that, when blended with bone dust, steadied the spirit of the mouth, as the wind steadied a ship's sail, an irony not lost on her, since the village had long equated strength with the raw grit of bone. She traced the faint lines with a trembling finger, noticing a drawing of curled leaves that resembled the herbal shrubs growing near the riverbank. The realization flickered like a distant star. The ancestors, perhaps, never condemned bone dust, but rather the omission of the soft companion that should have soothed it. A soft chuckle escaped her, barely audible over the crackle of the fire, as she imagined generations arguing over the exact proportion of powder to water, while the true answer lay in a forgotten leaf. The irony settled into a quiet acceptance that human habit often overlooks the modest detail that could have prevented the ache. At dawn, Asha walked to the riverbank, cupped cool water in her hands, and collected the dry, fragrant ash of the river sage, feeling its powdery texture slide between her fingers like fine sand. She mixed a measured spoonful of this herbal ash with the bone dust, letting the two substances kiss in a shallow stone bowl, while the morning mist curled around the village roofs. The combined paste felt smoother, its temperature warm from the lingering fire, and a faint citrus scent rose, calming the throats of those who inhaled it. When the villagers gathered again, the fire crackled in a steady, unhurried rhythm, and each person applied the new paste with gentle strokes, the brush of powder against gums barely audible. The illness abated, as if the added herb soothed the irritated tissue, and the murmurs of displeasure gave way to quiet gratitude, soft as the rustle of reeds in the light breeze. The night of the falling stars, once a canvas of tension, now settled into a tranquil glow, the ceremony concluding with the same measured cadence that had begun it. As the last ember dimmed, a shell lingered by the empty fire pit, watching the remnants of bone dust and herbal ash settle into the earth, a reminder that even the most earnest attempts can carry unnoticed flaws. She thought of the ancestors, their faces blurred by time, who perhaps valued balance more than the spectacle of a grand ritual. The villagers, now resting on low cushions, fell into a gentle sleep, their breaths matching the slow cadence of the night. Each exhale a silent acknowledgement of their shared frailty. In that stillness, the meteor shower continued above, its silent streaks tracing patterns that no one would ever claim as prophecy, merely beautiful reminders of the world's indifferent motion. The story of the bone dust paste lingered like a faint aftertaste, teaching that humility, observation, and a pinch of forgotten knowledge can turn a night of illness into a quiet lesson for generations. In the low light of the communal hearth, the villagers gathered the fine white dust that fell from the bones of the river's fish, mixing it with charcoal ash from the burnt sage leaves. A Shah, whose hands were steady from years of careful grinding, poured the blend into a shallow bowl, the sound of the powder slipping like dry sand. The air held a faint, chalky scent that hinted at both death and renewal, a reminder of the ancestors whose remains were now a medicine. Children watched from the periphery, their eyes reflecting the flickering flames, while the elders whispered of a lineage that trusted the marrow's whisper. The paste, cool to the touch, rested ready to be applied to the aching gums of the ailing chief, a ritual that had been repeated through generations. When the chief's son, Koro, saw the paste spread across the wound, his brow furrowed as the smooth texture contrasted with the crumbling belief around him. He questioned the old caretakers, his voice low but steady, asking whether the bone dust was truly the source of the healing, or merely a symbol of reverence. The council of elders shifted in their woven seats, the rustle of their garments echoing a hesitant murmur as they clutched the sacred texts whose faces were forever hidden in shadow. Karo's challenge lingered like a cool wind through the open doorway, stirring the dust particles that hung in the dim light. A tense pause settled over the circle, the silence speaking louder than any chant. Later that evening, as the paste was applied and the chief's fever ebbed, the villagers observed a subtle, almost imperceptible change. The swelling receded, and a faint warmth returned to his cheek. The irony lay in the fact that the very ritual Karo had doubted produced a tangible result. Yet the elders continued to attribute it to the unseen spirits that lingered behind the blurred silhouettes of their ancestors. The crackling fire seemed to laugh quietly, sending a brief gust that lifted the dust, exposing the simple chemistry of calcium and ash. Observers whispered about the paradox of faith and observation, their tones soft as the cloth they used to wipe the chief's brow. The moment held a quiet humor, as if the universe itself were content to watch humans wrestle with their own explanations. With the chief's recovery affirmed, the council convened under the waning sky, their silhouettes painted against the amber glow of the setting sun. They reached a compromise, agreeing to preserve the ceremonial use of bone dust, while allowing its practical benefits to be acknowledged openly. A balance struck like a gentle hand on a trembling rope. A Shah placed the remaining paste into a small clay jar, the lid sealing with a soft click that resonated like a quiet promise. Karo, his shoulders relaxed, nodded to the elders, his eyes reflecting the calm acceptance of a compromise forged through observation. The night settled around them, the sounds of distant crickets punctuating the stillness, as the community moved forward with both reverence and reason intertwined. In the days that followed, the villagers incorporated the paste into daily oral care, its usage becoming as routine as the washing of hands before meals. Yet the story of its origin remained a quiet thread in their collective memory. The blurred faces of the ancestral figures lingered in the background of their thoughts, a reminder that some mysteries keep their veil despite clarity in practice. A Shah often watched the children smile, their teeth clean and bright, feeling the gentle hum of continuity that bridged past and present. Karo, now more reflective, would sometimes sit by the hearth, feeling the coolness of the stone beneath his palms, contemplating how belief and observation could coexist without conflict. The village, bathed in the soft amber of evening, exhaled a collective sigh of contentment, the rhythm of life continuing in its steady, unhurried cadence. In the amber light of early dawn, the riverbank village stirred, its people moving with the quiet rhythm of daily chores. Women ground mint leaves, while children chased sparrows along the mud-brown path. For generations, the folk had relied on herbal rinses to keep their teeth clean, the faint taste of sage lingering on their tongues as they brushed with coarse fibers. One afternoon, a trader slipped a small vial of pale powder, described in hushed tones as dust from long broken bones, into the marketplace. Curious hands lifted the container, feeling the cool, gritty texture against calloused palms, and whispered of ancestors who might have used such remnants. The air grew still as the notion settled, hinting at a bridge between old myths and a new, tangible remedy. Soon a council gathered beneath the thatched roof of the elders' hall, their faces half hidden by the soft glow of oil lamps, voices low but edged with unease. The elders, their eyes creased from years of watching the river's slow turn, questioned the safety of introducing the unfamiliar grit into cherished oral rituals, fearing it might disturb the spirits that watched over the village. Younger members tapped their fingers on the wooden table, the sound echoing like distant rain, arguing that the bitter taste of the bone dust was a sign of its potency. A tense pause settled over the room, the only movement the gentle rustle of woven mats as someone shifted, stirring whispers of past illnesses cured by ancestral knowledge. The silence held the weight of generations, each breath a cautious step toward an untested practice. When Asha, a modest weaver known for her steady hands, stepped forward. She carried a small bowl of water warmed by the hearth, steam curling like lazy sighs in the cool air. She mixed the bone dust with crushed mint, the scent blooming stronger, and gently dabbed the paste onto her own teeth, feeling the coarse granules scrape against enamel with a surprising ease. The others observed, their eyes widening as a faint smile spread across Asha's face. The irony of her simple act restoring a confidence they thought lost. Laughter, soft and restrained, rippled through the hall, the sound like distant reeds brushing the water's surface, as the villagers realized that the feared intrusion was, in fact, a comforting embrace of the past. The moment settled into a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes the most pragmatic solutions hide within the myths they once feared to challenge. In the following weeks, the village adopted a modest rite at sunrise, where families gathered by the river's edge, the water reflecting a pale orange sky, to brush their teeth with the blended paste, while offering small offerings of woven reeds to the unseen ancestors. The air was scented with mint, and the faint metallic whisper of bone dust, each motion slow, the brush strokes echoing the gentle lapping of water against stone. Children watched the elders with reverent eyes, the solemn rhythm of the ceremony soothing as a soft drumbeat. while Asha stood at the center, her hands guiding the communal motion without fanfare. The rite solidified a belief that health derived from both the spirit of the forebears and the tangible gifts of nature, stitching together the old reverence and new understanding into a single, harmonious thread. As the sun climbed, the village felt a quiet restoration, a collective exhale that settled like dust on the riverbank. When the day waned and the river turned a deeper amber, its surface seemed to hum a low, melodic chant that carried the faint echo of restored smiles across the landscape. Asha walked alone along the water's edge, feeling the cool sand between her toes, reflecting on how a single simple act had woven together myth and medicine. The villagers rested on wooden benches, their faces soft with contentment, the occasional chuckle about the strange taste of bone dust, now a gentle reminder of their shared journey. The river's song lingered, a serene lullaby that blended the rustle of reeds with the faint clink of pottery, embodying the notion that humanity's progress often lies in the quiet acceptance of both the seen and the unseen. In that lingering hush, the community settled into a steady breath, aware that the harmony they had reclaimed would linger like the river's steady flow, steady and unhurried.